Right, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing time so far. Our next speaker is Wes Barlow. He's a senior data scientist at USAA. Please join me in welcoming Wes to our virtual stage.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. So I will be talking about natural language processing in HR. And I apologize for the lack of slides or things behind me. For those who are in an HR space now, I guess you probably know that things are quite crazy, just generally across in the financial service industry, as well as other industries as well, with this kind of new ways of working, all this virtual working, and then the subsequent changes um, to employee retention and employee attraction that can occur because of these big changes that are occurring. But so in NLP for HR, I'm going to go over some just general questions that you would typically be asked to deal with, as well as talk about some of the tools that you might use to do that. So within the HR space, with running natural language processing in the HR space would be slightly different from in other fields, primarily due to the limitation of the data sets that you are going to encounter. For the most part, we're going to be talking smaller data sets. Usually the language that is used by the employees is going to be much more similar than you might find if you were running NLP on a far larger, which is um, I guess it has its benefits and it has its drawbacks, especially if you're looking at developing your own tools or bringing in other vendor tools. For instance, culturally, many organizations have their own way of speaking. Their own terms that they would use that mean specific things within that organization that may not mean the same thing outside of the organization. So in doing that, I mean that's definitely a major consideration when you're deciding how you're going to tackle a question that the business may ask you. And the questions that you will usually encounter in that space are going to be theme related and sentiment related. Theme meaning what are employees talking about? What are major issues that might be going on with the employee space? You may have some set up kind of formal listening channels. Maybe you have a survey that goes out that allows for some qualitative feedback for the employees, or maybe you have internal channels. Maybe you have internal Slack channels or other kind of comment sections where employees might be able to leave comments that then the organization may ask you to analyze. And if you get to the point where you have enough comments that it requires natural language processing, that's something that you would bring into the mix. So with themes, it's always interesting, especially when you're talking with smaller data sets, when you're doing theme detection, because you'll have leaders that might say we've made a change to benefits, or we've made a change to this. How do employees feel about that? So one, you would need to check out the themes and see, are they speaking about that? And then you would also go down the sentiment path. So with themes, it can get very tricky with smaller data sets. An example that I like to use is around I guess the old 80s hit Maniac. So there's a statement in that song that she's dancing like she's never danced before. Which within the context of the song, or within a context of even the movie Flashdance that the song appeared in, you understand that to mean that she was the dancing better than she ever had before. However, that statement or that sentence by itself, she's dancing like she's never danced before, is could be interpreted to mean that she's dancing like somebody with zero experience who has never danced before. So when you're running natural language processing over themes, that is one of the things really to keep in mind when you're dealing with smaller data sets. And a lot of it is to kind of set level expectations with leadership around the degree of accuracy that you're going to get. Because just in general, qualitative analysis, like human analysis of text, is going to have a degree of error or disagreement when you have people that are reading the items. Bringing in a tool or an automated way to do this is typically going to have the same error rate and many times a higher error rate. So one benefit that can be that I've used in the past to help kind of drive some meaning into the ambiguous statements is to pair these statements with other operational data that may exist. For instance, if this data is being captured through a purposeful instrument, so if it's qualitative feedback being captured through maybe an always on feedback solution, or a qualitative survey that goes out once a month, is to ask them some quantitative questions regarding as well. So like, for instance, you could ask like their just general employee satisfaction or other possibly more pointed, appropriate questions. And you can use that responses in conjunction with a qualitative feedback that you are receiving or analyzed through your NLP algorithm to possibly get a little better. And so what we've done in practice, particularly when you're looking at things like sentiment, when a person may indicate a theme, say you've made a change to the way compensation occurs. Say you're going to go to, we'll just make something up. Say you're going to go to a monthly pay cycle instead of a biweekly pay cycle. And they want to know how employees are reacting to that type of change. So you might see run a theme detection model to pick up what employees are talking about or which groups of employees are talking about it. And that provides one piece of information. But then you may want to run a sentiment model on top of that to determine, are they speaking about positively or are they speaking about it negatively? In that type of analysis would be much more robust if you have some quantitative component that you can gather or marry to your data as well. Another piece you'd probably want to bring in that scenario is any operational data you have. Maybe that change impacts employees at a certain level more than other employees. Maybe you have employees that are at lower levels of compensation and live more paycheck to paycheck. So moving their paycheck to a once a month is a really big deal for them and may impact their day-to-day living. Versus you might have employees at higher levels with higher levels of compensation that are less impacted. They're not really living paycheck to paycheck. They usually have some stable savings and some stable money in there. The other piece is once they ask the question and you kind of have the data, is whether or not you should be kind of generating your own tools, developing your own tools for analysis, or looking at a vendor solution. And I touched on it a little in the very beginning. So vendor solutions can be very nice in that they can be very slick and very quick as far as turning around really fun visuals and giving a really fast way to kind of analyze text or emerging things in your data. They can be less nice if you have a very strong corporate culture with a very specific terms. A lot of the models used for a vendor applied solution are probably going to be based on very large external data sets, maybe Wikipedia, maybe something they purchased from Facebook, or maybe something they purchased from somewhere else. And usually a very, very large, diverse corpus, because they're looking for something that's very generalized. If you're working for, say, a large organization that has a very strong internal culture, the models they built probably aren't going to work as well for you as something that you could build internally. And there are some vendor solutions that have been starting to come out that take into account this, and they will rebuild based on your internal items. And then the question for build versus buy becomes a little more complicated. Alternatively, you can fire up an R session or Python yourself within your team, and then go through the normal packages and create it. The issue that we've run into there in the past is the time to do the analysis and then move into something that can be delivered to your stakeholders or requesters can be a little bit longer than maybe a vendor solution with a company like some of the big names. So we have Clarabridge that has theirs. You have Qualtrics, which has some pretty good text analytics kind of built in, and their turnaround time is very quick compared to something that you develop in-house. But then the other piece that I will go on, and it might be my last piece I touch on here, are the types of questions that you get asked. One thing you will get asked if you are an NLP practitioner in an HR space, you may be asked for, we're hearing this, we're hearing that, can you look through the qualitative or the text data we have and find, support for this argument? That is something, if you do it long enough, you'll absolutely have that. They may not be as kind of blatant with that statement as I just was, but it'll be there, where they're looking for kind of some qualitative information to support a conclusion that they've already drawn. If possible, if you're able to do that from an internal political standpoint, the best way to handle that would be to say that no. That is not the right way to do things. That is not kind of a scientific way of evaluating or finding qualitative or using qualitative information. That you should not go in and look to find text that confirms something that you already believe. Primarily because what I talked about briefly about the interpretation differences. Since statements can be ambiguous, if you go in there with an end result in mind, you can probably find support for whatever that end result is. If they're asking you something like why employees are turning over, and that's a good question that you could analyze, why employees are turning over. Now, if they say that, I heard employees are turning over because they don't like that we're all having to, move to Colorado. Can you find me some data to support that? No. Now that is a bad request to go investigate, because you could probably find data to support that. You can also probably find data to refute that. You don't typically want to go in there when you're assessing qualitative data, which is in essence what you're doing when you're practicing NLP in the HR space, is you're just assessing qualitative data. You don't want to go in there with a conclusion in mind and look for finding support, because you can probably always find support. You can probably find support for it. You can find support against it, etc. The better method is to without a conclusion or deliverable in mind, is to perform kind of an overall analysis of themes and sentiment within the data. And then through that, you can go and see if that emerged as something that kind of came up if you're using more of an unsupervised approach, say if you're doing like an LDA for theme analysis, or something that's been more of my go-to in recent times, is performing an LDA after kind of vectorizing your text. And then which I guess LDA at that point just really looks more like k-means clustering once you're kind of moved into that space. But that's kind of the preferred tactic that we would take currently. On that, those are the main items. A typical stack, if you're going to practice NLP within HR. I mean, obviously there's BERT and other really good kind of algorithm or tools that have been developed and made widely available to use, that in many cases within HR would be very useful, as long as you're kind of adapting or adjusting based on the culture. So word vectorization, I know is one that I mentioned. So, Glove or Word2Vec would also be very common algorithms that you could use to that vectorization. There's also a really fun, if you're an R user, there's a really nice blog post around using PMI, calculating the PMI value between words, that if you're dealing with a fairly large data set, or you don't have access to a really fast or high-powered machine to do it, calculating the PMI values for the words within your corpus can be a very efficient way to get you really close to what you'd get to if you were to run a use a glove algorithm or Word2Vec to analyze the overall set. Which I know this has probably been a weird mixture of deeper technical and more higher level items, which unfortunately, if you're doing NLP in the HR space, that's going to be your life. That's going to be the way that it is. A lot of times you're somewhat isolated from some of the other more technical areas of the organization. So you yourself would have to be fairly technical to do it, but the conversations you have will be primarily with non-technical folks. So you need to have more high level, more general conversations with them. which makes it exciting, and at times can make it very, very frustrating. But the big piece, I guess, if there were to be a single takeaway or single message that I want to give, is if you are looking at practicing NLP within a people analytics or HR space, is to familiarize yourself with qualitative research and qualitative research methods, because that's really, when you're looking at things like theme detection and sentiment. I mean, we have literal decades of information to draw on in the qualitative research field, because what you're doing in essence when you're doing that theme detection is you're kind of automating what a human qualitative researcher would be doing when you're doing that NLP. And in some ways, you're doing it possibly better. You can definitely do it a lot faster than you do it if you were a human doing it. But some of the issues and pitfalls are the same. One of the barriers being language, another one being word usage, and then also all of the barriers around internal and personal biases are there as well. When you're doing the analysis, to kind of understand and check your own biases, so that you're not just seeing the things that you want to see or that you think you're going to see, that you are really doing a more extreme analysis. Because even if you were to use primarily unsupervised techniques to do it, there is absolutely still the possibility for your personal bias to leak in. Ways I've seen it leak in with individuals who are very, very competent analysts and scientists is basically, if they ran it through the first time and it generated some themes or some sentiment that they expected to see, they would usually stop and move on. If they ran it through and it generated something that they didn't expect to see, then they're going to run it again. Maybe they'll do some more cleaning, maybe they'll do some more pivoting, and they keep doing it. And not that they will keep doing it until they see what they want. A lot of times people aren't consciously making that decision. But it is because it didn't fit what their kind of preconceived notion or their bias was. They look deeper. And so, not that looking deeper is bad. My request or my push to anybody out there doing this would be that you should always look deeper, even if the initial result matches what you expected to see. You should perform the same rigor on the analysis as if it didn't match what you wanted to see. And I think that's good for a closing comment. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you in one of the other sessions.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing these insights with us. That was incredible. And I know this virtual audience is going wild with applause. That was awesome. Thank you again. For the audience, it's time for you to make your way to your next session. Along the way, make sure you accept your connection request and take some time to check out our awesome exhibits. Thanks so much, and we'll see you around.